All right, welcome back to the Krueg Show. We're talking NBA basketball this morning with the great Grant Napear, longtime voice of the Kings. And Grant, wow, what can you say? The Brooklyn Nets are going home. KD, Kyrie, with Ben Simmons, we never saw you. And the Nets, the Nets check out against Boston. Boston clearly was the better team.
Yep.
It made me laugh when it's just everybody turned on Ben Simmons and felt like it was like they had license to just bury the guy. I personally don't, not that they don't, but it was interesting to me that, you could have buried this guy at any point, and instead people waited till he's not going to suit up in that last game. Oh my goodness. Now let's really let him have it. Give me your read on the Celtics saying goodbye to the Nets.
Well, I just did a rant on this. And first of all, I don't understand the people that are blaming Steve Nash for this. How the hell do you blame Steve Nash for this? I mean, you lost Joe Harris. They only played him 14 games. You had Kyrie Irving, who, didn't want to get vaccinated, couldn't play in the home games. You lose Durant for 6 weeks in the middle of the season. You make a big deal with Philadelphia. And one of the guys that you think is going to really be able to help you doesn't want to play. Ben Simmons, Mr. Professional Head Case, all right? I mean, the guy's let down teammates wherever he's been, LSU, Philadelphia, now Brooklyn. I believe that the criticism is very justified towards Ben Simmons. I agree with you that piled on late, but they've been really getting on Simmons' case all year. The fact that he and his agent feel that they're entitled to the $20 million that Philly took away from him is mind-boggling. But how do you blame this, Larry? How do you blame this on Steve Nash? What the hell is Steve Nash supposed to do? He had a train wreck this year. And as you just said, and you said it very well, Boston was a much better team. We have to acknowledge that, right?
Yeah, no question. Jason Tatum was the best player in the series. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. They did an incredible job on KD. KD went 39, 9 assists, 7 rebounds, and a steal in the game Monday. But Durant was 19 of 52 shooting for the series.
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin Durant has never lost in the first round, and he's at home.
Well, a lot of people want to pile on the Durant. I don't know what Durant could have done. Larry, you made a good point. I think last week, maybe the week before, that you thought that Brooklyn looked tired to you. Like they didn't look fresh. And there was a lot of talk about the minutes that Durant logged when he came back from his injury and whether or not took effect. I think we try to overanalyze these things. I really do. Boston was the better team. And Larry, generally speaking, in a 7-game series, and this only went 4, generally speaking, the better team is going to prevail. Boston was better. They had cohesiveness. They were consistent. Again, Brooklyn never really had their lineup on the floor the entire season. Nash was moving players in and out. He had to deal with a lot of stuff, injuries. Listen, Larry, I believe in consistency. I believe it's important. And the Nets just didn't have it all year. So they're done. I guess the bigger question, Larry, is what are the Brooklyn Nets going to look like next year? Right now, there's a little bit of unknown. I know Irving said he wants to be here, blah, blah, blah. He said the same thing, in Boston, and then he ended up in Brooklyn. So I don't know. I'm not a big believer in Kyrie Irving in this sense. I think if you're a teammate in the locker room of Irving, you don't know if you can really depend on the guy. I mean, it was last year he took 3 leaves of absence in the middle of the season. After the first one, he said, well, I just needed a break. Who the hell says that? I mean, can you really count, Larry, and Kyrie Irving is unbelievably talented. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
But there's more to being successful in pro sports than just being talented. If you're in that locker room with Irving, can you really count on him, Larry? Do you really know that when push comes to shove, he's going to be there lined up next to you? I don't think the answer to that question is yes. I think it's no. So there are a couple of issues for sure with Brooklyn. And then, oh yeah, by the way, there's Ben Simmons. What is the real story with Ben Simmons? What's the real story? If I said this yesterday, if he has mental health issues, then deal with them. All right. And I don't even know how to define mental health issues, but it's now a popular term in this country. And I'm not downplaying it. There are people that have serious mental health issues. And I have sympathy for those people, but deal with it. If Ben Simmons truly has mental health issues, which is preventing him from his occupation, then don't do your occupation. Find something else to do. All right. And then get well and do what you have to do to become a better human being. But the reality is he's a bad professional. Okay. He just is. He's not capable of doing his job, which he's getting paid millions and millions of dollars for. So maybe he should be doing something else. So as we look into the offseason for Brooklyn, Irving is always a situation. And then Ben Simmons. Are you going to be able to really depend on this guy based on his short history? And Larry, this is a guy that's been a multiple All-Star, I think 3 times. He's one of the better defensive players in all of basketball. Yes, he can't shoot, but he does a lot of other things very well. He could really help the Brooklyn Nets, but who knows if you're ever going to see him on the floor. And once he gets on the floor, Larry, can you count on him? Does he have the stability mentally to deal with the boos that he is certainly going to hear around the country? I don't have an answer to that question, but I'd be very leery if I were a fan of the Nets.
I'll tell you, the NBA's got to stop paying players based on potential.
Mm-hmm.
This is a player who never was good at LSU. They weren't good when he was there. Then he goes to the pros, and he they took away all motivation once they gave him a guaranteed big money contract. Now he may have serious, real mental health issues, or he may be a guy who doesn't work on his game and can't shoot and is now feeling the brunt of the criticism that inevitably comes your way when you can't shoot and you fail publicly when you're making millions of dollars. So which is it? And then as far as Irving goes, I mean, the New York market. How are they going to respond to Irving going forward? Does he need to leave in your mind, or do you think is he persona non grata in the Big Apple, or can he leave? Can he go, or is he going to be forced to go somewhere else?
I don't see, and listen, Kyrie Irving, we know what he did against the Warriors, okay, and how good he was in winning that championship. So let's acknowledge that he's an unbelievably talented player, and we get that out of the way. But there are a lot of intangibles with Kyrie Irving. And you mentioned the New York market. I don't believe he can succeed in that market. Now, it is Brooklyn. It's not New York. And me being a New Yorker, I can tell you there's a big difference between being in Brooklyn and being in New York. Yeah, I know it's the media, but it's not. Brooklyn will always play second fiddle to New York, even when the Knicks are terrible. They just will. It's the reality of the market. It's just the way it goes. The Mets will always play second fiddle to the Yankees. Doesn't really matter how good the Mets are and what the Yankees are doing. It's the market. Well, with that said, I don't believe Kyrie Irving is going to have a long-term marriage in Brooklyn, Larry. I just don't see it. I just don't see it.
Let's talk about Boston now, because all the focus is on the Nets. I kind of feel bad for Boston. Boston is the victor. Boston has a young core with Tatum leading the charge, and Jaylen Brown's a big part of that as well. Marcus Smart.
Yep.
Grant Williams stepped up with a big performance, I thought, in the first half of the last game. Is Boston getting out of the East? Is Boston the best team in the East, Grant? I mean, what do you think? How do you handicap the East?
I love the way they played at the end of the year. It took Ime Udoka, who I got to know when he played in Sacramento, and I just love the guy. I think I think the years that he spent on the bench with Pop, and he really earned his way to this level. And he got off to a bad start, and he started hearing some of the criticism. It really took the Celtics, Larry, a while to get going. But if you look at what they did towards the second half of the year and coming into the playoffs, they were as good as any team in the league, really. Couldn't they come out of the East? They sure can. You and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. How do you handicap the East, Larry? I mean, you could see Milwaukee coming out, right? I could see Miami coming out. I really could. I don't think Philadelphia is the team. I'm just not sold on James Harden. So you have Boston, you have Milwaukee, and you have Miami. Is Milwaukee and Miami that much better than Boston? I think it's a crapshoot, Larry, but I could see Boston coming out of the East, absolutely, because I don't think there's a big difference between those 3 teams that I just mentioned. I really don't.
What do you think of Philly? I mean, Embiid's got the thumb, and he's not 100%. And Harden, I don't know what to say about Harden. It just seems like, somebody compared Harden to, a player who just shows up and suddenly doesn't have it anymore. Where are you with Harden? Where are you with the Sixers?
I've never been a James Harden fan. I've never have been a fan of his. And even though I acknowledge that he's one of the very best offensive players of his generation, and I mean, I have announced many of his games, and I marvel when I'm announcing his games. But I don't think you win with James Harden. I think that was very evident in the series against Golden State a couple of years ago in Game 6 and 7 when they had the home court and Harden, wet his pants. The guy does not respond in big games. I've never been a fan of James Harden as it relates to winning a championship. I'm a fan of his talent-wise. I'm a fan of his in what he can do offensively, but I don't think James Harden is going to take you to where you want to go, and that's the NBA Finals. There's also the question of Doc Rivers. Yes, he won a championship in Boston with a loaded team. He never got the Clippers out of the second round when he had Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan in their prime. Think about that. Think about that team, and he could never get out of the second round. I'm questioning Doc. Do we overrate Doc, Larry, as a head coach? I'm not saying he's a bad coach, but is he overrated? Do you feel that people give Doc too much credit for being a really good NBA head coach? I think it's a question that's worth, exploring.
I think Doc is popular. I mean, I think he'll play the game. He's got a lot of good relationships around the league. I think he's a guy that people like. But there's enough holes in the resume where you go, I don't know. I'm not really sure where I would rank him. He's one of the more difficult coaches to rank. I think you'd almost have to ask each individual, player of the guys who played for him, where do you rank him? I mean, X's and O's, motivation, all the different factors that go into it.
Yeah.
I do think he gets a favorable grading because I think he's a likable guy.
He is a likable guy. I mean, everyone loves Doc. He's very personable. He's great in interviews. And I think that what you said is very true. But, Larry, this is a bottom line business, okay? And he's had some really, really good talent and has not succeeded with really good talent outside of Boston. So, you have to put that on there. But, back to your initial question, I'm not a believer in Philadelphia. And now with Embiid in the thumb, that's going to affect them and not being able to count on Harden in big games. I don't see Philadelphia. That's why I didn't include them, Larry, with Miami. I didn't include them with Boston and Milwaukee. To me, out of those three teams, I put then the fourth team, I put Philly behind all three of those. I don't know how you handicap these, but I
would too. I absolutely would. Let me ask you more about Milwaukee. This is where we start to get into the injury situation and how it impacts things. Chris Middleton has got an injury. Middleton's a key cog for them. I mean, we know Giannis is the best player on that team, but in some ways, Middleton is the guy that gets them a key bucket when they absolutely have to have one. Where are you with Milwaukee with his injury?
I don't think they can get back to the NBA Finals without Chris Middleton. He does too much for them. He just does. I don't see it happening. I'm not so sure they'll get out of the next round, Larry, without Chris Middleton. Now, I don't know. I believe that. I don't know. And I love Giannis. We all love Giannis. I mean, the guy's a tremendous player. I think that what they accomplished last year, just that proverbial monkey on their back, they finally did it. They finally broke through based on the previous years of disappointments in the playoffs. And, Budenholzer, I think, would have gotten fired, Larry. I mean, you got to remember, they were down 3-2 to Brooklyn and won that series. And if they don't beat Brooklyn last year, Budenholzer's not there. Obviously, they're still a Milwaukee Bucks team that we label as can't win when they have to. But you can't lose a Chris Middleton in the playoffs. And again, Larry, I don't know how long he's going to be out for. I don't know. But are we supposed to think that you could lose your second best? Can we put him as their second best player? Is that fair?
I think so.
Okay, so you're going to lose your second best player and you're still going to be able to move on in the playoffs? I don't see that. Look at the effect that we've seen with Phoenix without Booker. All of a sudden, that's turned into a hell of a series, has it not?
Yeah.
Do I think that the series would be where it is now had Booker not injured his hamstring? No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if it would be over, but it would be at least 3-1.
It is interesting in a sport like the NBA where one player makes a dramatic impact.
Sure.
That's the question or the intrigue that hangs over the playoffs annually is what player's going down in what freakish situation that's going to impact the entire thing. Before we get to Phoenix, let's hit on Miami in the East. Are people sleeping on the Heat? There's a lot that question's being asked around the NBA this morning. You know, Miami's got a great coach. They got a real nice cast. Seems like every other team, not necessarily because of positive attributes, sometimes because of controversy or negative things, has taken kind of the limelight away from the Heat. And the Heat just keep going, just keep plugging. And it's a weird situation. It's like there's so little dialogue about the Heat. But then when you look closer, you realize, you know what? This team may get there almost out of the East by default. Where are you with Miami?
Well, it starts with Pat Riley and the way he runs that entire organization. It doesn't matter whether you're a secretary or you're an assistant equipment manager. Everyone in that organization understands what the goal is, okay? And they all feel a part of the team. It's a very phenomenal organization because I've talked with people that work there and I've talked about what it's like when you first walk into the door and you get a handbook and it tells you what you're expected to do and what the core belief and philosophy of our organization is, and everyone follows it. So I love the organization. I love the way Riley runs his franchise. But Larry, we don't talk enough about defense in the NBA, and we should with Boston, but Miami defends most every night and on possessions. But I don't know if you saw what Trae Young said. He hasn't been defended like that since high school.
I saw that,
right? Miami comes out and they guard you. They play defense. And on nights when offensively they don't have it going, they're still able to win because they play such good defense. Eric Spoelstra does not get enough credit. The guy's a hell of a coach. He has put together a team. And when I say he's put together a team, he's coached a team that's got a lot of moving parts. They've been very active, bringing players in, sending players out. I like this team. I think that we don't talk about Miami enough. But when you look at their roster, but you look at the games that they have won this year against really good teams, they're the real deal. And if you told me that in June, we're going to be watching the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals, I wouldn't bat an eyelash. I could definitely see Miami coming out of the East. I mean, it's not a fluke, Larry, that they were the number one seed. You know, they didn't earn that by default. They didn't get lucky. No, they were the number one seed for a reason. They're really good. They're really good.
They're rugged. They're a rugged team. Jalen Brunson kept the Mavs going without Luka. Now Luka's back. And man, he was good last night. 33 points, 13 rebounds, 5 assists. He had a block and 5 turnovers. And they win 102-77 to give Dallas a 3-2 series lead in that Jazz Mavs series. Who did you like in this series at the beginning? And is this kind of the end of the road for Utah? I mean, it just seems like Utah is headed towards a big upheaval of some kind. I don't know if Gobert's leaving or Mitchell's leaving or who's going to stay or who's going to win the power struggle. It just seems like they're kind of stale right now. Where are you where were you coming into the series, and what do you think right now?
Well, I was with Dallas until I saw Luka get injured in the last game of the regular season. And I thought that was enough for the Jazz to prevail in this opening round. I thought without Luka for at least a couple of games, and as it turned out, 3 games, right? I thought that would be enough for the Jazz to build a lead where they could hold on and win this series. You know, we can talk about Dallas in a moment, but you just put it perfectly. What's wrong with the Jazz?
Yeah.
I mean, what has happened to this team? What's happened to Donovan Mitchell, Larry? I mean, doesn't even look like the same player to me.
Not at all.
And that is something I never thought we'd be saying. I always looked at Mitchell as, you know, playing in a market like Utah where they don't get a lot of publicity. I always thought he was one of the better players in the league and a guy that you could count on. He was a go-to guy. I don't know if mentally, you know, we hear all these stories, Larry, about him and Gobert going back from when they tested positive for COVID in March of 2020. And there's been a lot of rumors. I don't know what's true and what's not. Just like you, I'm not within the walls of that organization, but my eyes tell me there's something wrong with that franchise. Okay. My eyes tell me that there are issues in that locker room. I don't know if it's Quinn Snyder, which I find hard to believe, but there's obviously a personality conflict in that locker room, which I think is affecting them on the floor. When you look at their talent, they should be playing better than this. I'm not saying that they should win the series against Dallas, although, Larry, I mean, you told me Luka was going to miss 3 games. I would say you should win that series. But I give Dallas credit. You talked about Brunson. You talked about, some of the other players on Dallas. I mean, I give them a hell of a lot of credit. I mean, I really do. They lost game one, Larry, right? And you're thinking,
Yeah.
oh, wow, we're screwed without Luka. And they get back and win game two and then win game three in Salt Lake City to take the pressure off on game four. I know the series is still there for the taking, but how can you have any confidence in Utah?
Well, Mitchell's got a hammy, right? So it's another injury that
Yeah,
impacts things. Now, that's not why their whole chemistry is lousy, but that might be one of the reasons they're
could
going to
be.
go home here. And he's got the left hamstring, and he went straight to the locker room
Yeah, you're right. It's not good.
after the game, and it's just it's now, what do you make of the Booker injury? Because, Phoenix very much looked like the team to beat coming into the playoffs. And then Booker goes out, and it sounds like he's going to miss an extended period of time. And it's
Yep.
just, once again, it's the NBA. You can't
Yep.
lose these guys and win championships. You might be able to win the first round series. And I'm shocked at all that they're even being tested this round. But no Booker. They're a different club without him.
Think about New Orleans for a moment and think about how everything is aligned perfectly for them. They probably don't win in LA if Paul George doesn't test positive for COVID and can't play, right? I don't think they would have won that game. So they get a break there. All right. Now they're in a series 1 versus 8 where no one says they can win. Then Booker, hamstring. They win a game in Phoenix. They go back and make this a best of 3 now after splitting in their home court. And without the really, we don't know about Booker for how long, whatever. And if he comes back, his effectiveness, Larry, you can't mess with hamstrings.
Yep.
The Pelicans, to me, they're playing with house money, as we like to say. They shouldn't have. I don't think they would have won the Clippers if George had played, but they did. And now all of a sudden, they have no chance by the critics, the experts, of beating the Suns. There's no way an 8 is going to beat the 1. And Booker gets hurt, and it's opened up the door a little bit. New Orleans is a dangerous team right now, Larry. They're a dangerous team.
No Zion Williamson. I mean,
Yep.
and what do you make of where his career is at? I mean, I it's interesting, Grant. It's like he's an incredible talent, and I saw him at Duke, and I'm like, wow. And I saw him listed at 285, and I thought, 285
Yeah.
is maybe as heavy as I could see him getting. Then he put on another 10 pounds, and he's probably close to 300. I just think that this is a player who, it's not necessarily even fat. He just has so much mass on his frame,
Right.
that I think he needs a doctor to, some dietitian to kind of look at his body and figure out how he can trim his fat, but maybe more importantly, how he can trim down just some of the muscle mass that he carries on his upper torso. Because, Grant, his career,
it's not going to work.
His career is absolutely doomed for failure if he can't get south of 280.
I think it's even south of 270, to be honest with you. The way he plays, Larry, I use common sense here. My eyes tell me, and based on what we know about physics, my eyes tell me there's no way he's ever going to be able to stay healthy playing the way he does. I don't think it's possible. I mean, again, I always go back to common sense. Common sense just tells me you can't be that size, play the way he does, and not hurt your ankles, your knees. I mean, it's not going to happen. So if you're asking me long-term for Zion Williamson as a franchise, I don't think they can count on him. I really don't. I don't see it changing. And Larry, here's the other aspect. When you're young, that's when you're not supposed to have these problems. These are problems that you would expect, when you turn 26, 27, 28, 20. I mean, again, I'm starting at the very minimum there. You get into your, upper 20s, 30. He's still a pup and he's having these problems. Why would we think that all of a sudden he's going to be healthy? I don't see it happening. I don't think you can count on Zion Williamson.
It's funny. I was thinking of we were talking about this the other day, like what's a good comp? I was thinking maybe Larry Johnson, Grandmama, maybe a guy that you're familiar with, Corliss Williamson. There have been thicker guys in the NBA, Daryl Dawkins, if you want to go way back. but I can't think of anybody who's had that kind of weight on their frame that had any real successful longevity.
Add DeMarcus Cousins to that list.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, ACL, Achilles, a lot of weight. He would always come into camp in great shape. And then as the season went on, he would add weight. I mean, you could look at him in November and look at him in April. He had a completely different body because he didn't have the discipline to keep his weight down, and he ate a lot, and he really did. I mean, and I think it affected him with his injuries. I mean, you made a couple of really good examples there. And here's the other aspect about Zion Williamson. We really haven't seen this ever before. Have we? Correct me if I'm wrong. Have we ever seen a guy like this come into the league?
Shaq. I mean, Shaq is a monster.
Monster, but did not play. He wasn't as athletic as Zion Williamson.
It wasn't a 40-inch vert.
That's correct. So when you jump high in the air, Larry, you have to land, right? Shaq wasn't jumping like that. Yes, Shaq was a freight train coming onto the floor, but I can't think of anyone that's come into the league with Zion Williamson's body and athleticism. I mean, when Sean Kemp came in, Sean didn't weigh anything like that. Sean was a freak when he came into the league, and he took your breath away. But he wasn't nearly as big as Zion Williamson. I just don't see it, Larry. My eyes tell me it's not going to work.
Do you think he wants out of that situation? And I mean, I don't know that I would want to trade for a guy like that. I'm looking at the Warriors situation with James Wiseman. James Wiseman's another guy. He's got a world of talent, but this knee injury that just lingers and lingers and lingers. I don't know what the Warriors are going to do with him. I don't know what the Pelicans are going to do with Zion, but these are players with careers that are literally at the crossroads, and it's like, what are you going to do? Let me pay some bills, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Warriors because Telmetrics is one of our sponsors. And if you're an orthopedic surgeon, an occupational therapist, a chiropractor, or a physical therapist, Telmetrics.co is designed for you to use in your practice and will greatly benefit your patients. Telmetrics uses computer vision and artificial intelligence and provides a platform for outpatient rehab therapy services, both in clinical and telehealth environments. Using Telmetrics can improve your patient's experience and much more. So if for all your sports injury needs, if you're a physical rehabilitation specialist, make sure you go to telmetrics.co, Telmetrix.co. Thanks to Casey Bateman and the people at Telmetrics. And also our sponsor, Dan Coach Emilio. A lot of uncertainty in the world. You want to make sure your money's taken care of. Danny will do that for you. He's got 25 years of experience. SecureMoney.com. He is a retirement planning specialist. And give him a call today, 925-628-9966. SecureMoney.com. Dan Coach Emilio, Bay Area guy, a guy you can trust. He'll take care of you. 925-628-9966. Thanks to Dan for being a sponsor. Regular sponsor of the Krueg Show. Thank you to Danny and to Casey from Telmetrics and, of course, SecureMoney.com. All right, let's talk about the Warriors. They go tonight. They didn't finish off Denver the other night. And they looked like they could have, but they didn't on Sunday. Or didn't. Yeah, I think it was Sunday. What do you think? I mean, where are you on Golden State? I mean, do you look at Golden State as they're the favorite right now in Las Vegas to win the whole thing?
I would pick them.
You would make them the favorite?
I would, absolutely. And I'll tell you why I would make them the favorite. First of all, they're going to win this series. It's going to be over in 5. Because they're gelling and they're getting better as we progress. I know they lost the last game, but it's very difficult to win 4 games in a row in the playoffs, no matter who you're playing. It is.
Yeah.
I love the way everyone is buying into their role. As long as they stay healthy, Larry, who in the West do you think would have again, assuming that the Warriors stay healthy, Larry, who in the West do you feel, and we don't even know who's going to win some of these series, but who do you feel would be the toughest matchup for them in the West?
Probably the Grizzlies because of the size, but maybe Phoenix if Ayton, I mean, they're going to have a hard time matching up with Phoenix or Memphis, I think.
Okay.
Karl Anthony Towns is interesting, but, and he can look dominant in any one game. But I just think Memphis has got such size, and they're so good inside. And then you look at Phoenix. I mean, Ayton. If they had a Wiseman, maybe, but I don't see the purpose of Kevon Looney at this point. I'm not sure what Looney's getting done out there. I almost prefer to see them go small and play Gary Payton more minutes and not play Looney as much. But that's the Warriors' bugaboo. I mean, I'll say this, Grant. Green is playing at, I think, his highest level. Now, he shot the ball better than this, but he's never quite played this controlled, this focused, this determined. He knows he's one title away from the Hall of Fame, and he can taste it. And I just think he's leading the way right now. He's playing at a crazy level.
I think he's the MVP of the playoffs so far. And again, I know we're only talking 4 games. Yeah, I mean, I really mean that. I think he's done more for Golden State than really any player. I just think what he's doing for that team right now is absolutely unbelievable. So you asked me about the Warriors and Vegas having them as the favorite.
Right.
If the Warriors come out of the West, Larry, that means they will have won 3 rounds and they are feeling like them old selves. You want to play, I mean, you think about Curry, you think about Clay, you think about Draymond, think about their championship pedigree, all of their playoff games. They will, if they survive the West, they're going to enter the NBA Finals thinking that they're the Warriors of a couple of years ago. And we can also add all the other players that have contributed to where they are right now. I don't think there's a team in the East that's going to beat Golden State if the Warriors get into the finals and they're healthy. Because by that point, we're talking about June. They're going to get better and better, and they're going to feel invincible. So I think the Warriors are right there. I'm not saying they're going to have a cakewalk getting out of the West, but you mentioned a couple of these injuries. I don't know who would be the most difficult matchup. If is Memphis going to win this series against Minnesota, Larry? If
2-2, game 5 tonight.
I mean, if Memphis were to come out of this series, okay, they're going to start feeling a little bit better about the. I like Memphis. I like their lineup. But I didn't think this series would be tied 2-2, Larry. I'm a little surprised by that.
I'm shocked by that too.
I didn't think so. And now all of a sudden anything can happen in a best of 3. And you mentioned injuries. I mean, guy turns his ankle or whatever. Hey, all of a sudden it's a whole new ball game.
Totally. A couple of things on the Warriors as we kind of hammer down on them. Jordan Poole has taken it to another level. Steve Kerr decided because Poole had played so good, averaging 25 a game down the stretch as Steph was trying to get healthy. So he went with Poole at the beginning of the series in the starting lineup and brought Steph off the bench. Has that run its course? Would you abandon that and bring Steph back into the starting lineup?
I probably would.
And tinker with things, maybe sit a guy like Looney and go with a smaller lineup. What do you think? Because Steph's been coming off the bench and he can do it.
Yeah.
But he's one of the all-time great players in the NBA. That's not going to continue forever.
I always like to wait until after a loss. I don't like messing with momentum. It's like a goaltender in hockey that might not be your number one goalie, but he all of a sudden gets in the nets and he has a shutout. You're not going to take him out of the next game. So, I like keep going with what's working. Now, after a loss, I would go back to Curry as my starter. Why? Because he's Steph Curry. He's one of the very best players ever. And, you're better with Curry, I think, starting, even though, as you mentioned, Poole, I always like the term, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm not saying it's broken, but I think it's easier to make that change after a loss. I mean, Steph Curry's not a bench player, Larry. Steph Curry is one of the great players ever. Put him in the starting lineup where he belongs. Maybe we're making too much of this. Maybe it really doesn't matter because the Warriors are just better than Denver. But we're looking ahead. We're peeking ahead a little bit in terms of what you're going to do in round 2 and if you make round 2 to round 3. But to me, Steph Curry is your starting point guard and as good as there is in the league. So, yes, I would start him. What would you do?
I love the decision by Kerr initially because I thought it kept Poole in rhythm. Give me your evaluation of Poole because he was a second-round pick.
Yeah.
I thought he was a shameless gunner, And this kid has worked and worked and worked. It worked. His work ethic
It's amazing.
is second to none. And now he's emerged as a almost a borderline star player. I don't know where what is the difference between regular season and postseason as far as intensity in your mind? And give me your evaluation of where Jordan Poole is, because he found this last game
Yeah,
kind of wasn't great, but man, the rest of this series he's played
great.
exactly like he played down the stretch.
Well, first of all, you have to remember he's not at his ceiling yet. So as good as he's playing right now, he's got another level that I think he's going to get to, which could be very scary for the rest of the league. Where do I see him? I've heard a lot about his work ethic too. And it's funny that you mentioned work ethic because my son works for the Kings. He's visiting locker room attendant. And he told me this year that when the Bucks were in town, they had a day off. And the only player that came over to get a workout in was Giannis. And he said when the Celtics were in town, they had a day off. And the only player on the Celtics that came in for a workout on their off day was Jason Tatum. Okay. I used to watch LeBron come into the arena hours before the game and go through an unbelievable workout. Ray Allen used to come out 3 hours before every game. I used to see, Michael Jordan and Larry Bird come out into the arena before any of the fans or anybody was there. You know what? These players have talent, but you know what separates the good players from the very good players to the elite players is their work ethic. And I hear what you just talked about with Poole, and I love that. I mean, that's why he is where he is. Yeah, he's talented. Yeah, he's gifted. But you talked about, being a second-round pick and where he's elevated to. Don't you think there's another level still for him to get to, Larry, as good as he is?
Yeah. Yeah, I do, because he's what he's doing right now is all on his physical ability, and I think, and his, he's got an unbelievable first step, and he's got a nice surrounding cast, but the nuances of the game are he's still a pup,
Yes. Yes.
and I would say 2 years from now he's going to be a significantly
Yeah.
more refined player. Now you can get him out of his rhythm. 2 years from now, you won't be able to get him out of his rhythm.
Let me ask you this. So you asked me, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to make you Steve Kerr, getting ready for Game 5 tomorrow. What are you going to do? Who are you going to start?
I'm sitting Looney. I'm going small. I think I'd like to go small. I think and then I'm playing Peyton more minutes. I think if there's one common denominator of the Warriors' losses this year, Grant, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, I can't cite it chapter and verse. It's more of just a kind of feeling from having watched them. Almost every time this year where they've lost, and I've thought to myself, man, that didn't look good. I look down at the box score, and Gary Payton either didn't play or they forgot about him in the second half and left him on the bench. And for whatever reason, maybe it's because Kerr was an offensive player, and this guy's strictly a defensive player. And sometimes when he's out there, it is 5-on-4. They're not guarding him, but he can knock down an open three and has, if you leave him wide open. I just think they forget about this player. This is one of the greatest defensive players in the league today. There's not a guard that feels comfortable pounding the dribble if Gary's nearby. He's that long. He's that tenacious. He's got the instincts and length from his father, and just this unbelievable tenacity. He'll pick. I've seen guys, they're bringing the ball up on the right side, dribbling with their right hand. He's on the left side, and he'll reach across their body and pick them from the left side as they're dribbling with the right hand. That's what kind of length he has. And I just think that they forget about him sometimes, or they just don't. I don't know why they don't go to him, but almost when they've lost this year, almost always they didn't play him enough.
Interesting. I look at this as two different scenarios, the regular season and the postseason. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, but in the postseason, the possessions are all so important. And here the Warriors are up 3-1, and I'm not saying this for you, I'm saying for the people listening, when you're doing talk radio, when I've been doing talk radio, fans call up and they want to play everybody. Well, you can only play 5 guys at once,
right?
And there are, if you put someone in, you got to take someone out. And you just talked about the strengths of Gary Payton, but you also mentioned his weaknesses. So I look at the playoffs. If I'm looking at this from a Warriors perspective, what they did in the regular season means nothing to me. I don't care about the regular season with Golden State. They're not judging anything on the regular season. And yes, I understand this was a very disjointed season because of Clay coming back and all the other issues. And then you lost Curry towards the end of the year, and we can go on and on. I'm looking at this Warriors team only one way, and that started in game 1 against Denver. And here they are up 3-1. They've controlled pretty much the entire series up until game 4. I believe tomorrow they'll control that and move on. I'd be very surprised if they don't. So I have no issues with what they've done in the first 4 games. It's nice to know that you have a guy who is a defensive stopper if you need that possession, if you need a couple of minutes for defense. But again, you still have to take somebody out. And when you look at how good the other guards for Golden State have played, it's not the easiest decision in the world. But I like what you said. So you're telling me for game 5, you're going to go small, right?
That's what I'm going small.
All right.
I feel confident. You can always adjust in game, but I'm going small, and I'm coming out, and I'm torching the nets, and I'm sharing the ball, and I'm putting a big offensive push on a Denver team that's coming off of their best offensive game in the series, and they are struggling to find points to keep up with this group. Yep. To me, if you put Looney out there, you're playing into their hands. Don't put Looney out there. Score in the 130s if you can get there and blow this team off the floor.
So you want to track meet. You just want to get the
track
ball.
meet. Right. I want to score 120 plus because I don't think Denver can score over 110.
Now, if you score 120, the game's over. I agree with you. I mean, and if you score 120, I don't think the game's going to be close. So I'm with you. I like that strategy. I'm okay tomorrow to see the Warriors come out and just try to outscore them. Just, get a track meet. And you said this after game 1, and I went back and I looked at some of the. I don't disagree with what you said. You thought Denver looked a little fatigued, that they were a little worn out, because of the way Michael Malone's had to coach this team this year with all of their injuries. They really did. Their Jokic and guys, they logged a lot. I wonder how much they really have left in their tank. Interesting that they get the extra day. The game's not until tomorrow on Wednesday. So we'll see if that benefits Denver at all. But I'm with you. Run these guys off the floor.
Hey, last one, and we appreciate you hanging.
Yeah.
You made a comment earlier, and it leads right into the topic that I wanted to broach today. You're talking about Draymond Green, that he would be the MVP of the playoffs right now. You were around Chris Webber. In a lot of ways, Grant, I mean, I'm a Warrior fan, as you know, so I loved Webber when he was a Fab Five, and I was loving Nelly when he traded Anthony Hardaway to get Webber. And then that team won 55 games, and there was no Mullen and no Tim Hardaway, and they had Avery Johnson. It was like the hope for the future. You had Owens and Sprewell and Webber and Avery and Mully coming back and Hardaway, and it never happened. It blew up. Nelly, Webber blew up. They traded Webber. They fired Nelly. I mean, it sent the Warriors into a downward spiral. For that lasted really until Nelly came back with the We Believe Warriors. So it was a huge, momentous collapse. But in a lot of ways, I think of Draymond Green as everything that Webber was billed to be. Webber was going to be this great defender. He was going to protect the rim. He was going to play power forward, but he had the length to guard centers. He was going to be a distributor, a passer, a genius player. And it didn't work. And then out of nowhere, years later, here comes Draymond Green, 35th pick, second round. And in a lot of ways, I think Green is everything that Webber was billed to be. So let me throw it to you.
Sure.
How would you compare those two? Who's the better player between Chris Webber and Draymond Green? Are they both going to the Hall?
Webb got in last year.
Okay, so I mean, Webb's in, but is Green going to the Hall? And where do you put? Who's the better of those two players in your mind?
You want to win, right?
Absolutely.
All right, then you're taking Draymond Green, and you're not even thinking twice about this. Draymond Green is a far superior postseason player than Chris Webber, and it's not even close. I announced every single one of Chris Webber's games when he was with Sacramento. I announced every regular season game. I announced every postseason game. There wasn't one time that I walked out of the gym after a series and said to myself, boy, Chris was great in this series. Never happened. Chris never played in the postseason the way he did in the regular season. He just didn't. Draymond Green is a far superior player if you're trying to win, which last time I checked, that's why you're in professional sports. There's no comparison between Draymond Green and Chris Webber. In my opinion, it's not even close. It's night and day. Draymond Green does things in games that help you win. And when you need a stop, Draymond can get the stop. When you need a big shot, Draymond can make that big shot. Draymond, even though you have Steph Curry and even though you have Klay Thompson, doesn't mind taking the shot. Chris never really wanted to be that guy. It was Mike Bibby. It was other players. Chris just didn't live for that moment, and more times than not didn't come through in the big moments. Again, I announced every single one of his games, and I used to talk about this on the radio because, as you know, Larry, I had a radio show in Sacramento for 26 years, and I would talk about this every year about Chris Webber, the regular season Chris Webber, which Larry was great. I mean, Chris was great, but that did not translate into the postseason. I don't know what it is about certain athletes. We talk about this all the time. I mean, look at all the years that Barry Bonds was terrible in the playoffs, going back to Pittsburgh and even with San Francisco until he had that good year and they broke out, right? I mean, Dave Winfield was a great baseball player who was terrible in the postseason. I always thought Donovan McNabb was a great regular season quarterback, but didn't even come close in the postseason. I mean, if you just go back and look at his playoff games, they weren't even close to what he did during the regular season. Chris Webber was never that guy in the postseason. So if you're telling me I'm starting a franchise and I can go back in time and you're telling me, do you want Draymond Green or Chris Webber on your team? I'm running, okay, I'm getting the nearest limousine company and I'm going to meet Draymond at the airport when he lands and I'm picking his ass up and I'm putting him in my locker room, okay? Now, the one thing I don't like about Draymond, I do not like the way he complains after every call.
The histrionics.
That's right. Now, you made a good point. Through 4 games, he's been a lot better this year, but we don't know. And again, I think he cost the Warriors a championship, being very fair. Game 5 or Game 4 in Cleveland, I think he cost this team a championship. And I don't think you can just forget that. But in terms of what he does for your team in big games, when you can see, here's the deal. You can count on Draymond Green in the playoffs. You know what he's going to do on the floor. That was never true of Chris. Just never was. And so it's not even close, Draymond Green and Chris Webber in the postseason. Not even close.
If I asked NBA people, and you're one of them, but if I asked, 100 NBA people, Green, Webber, bigger talent, better player, was Webber the bigger talent, but Green was the better player?
Yes.
Was Green the bigger talent? Green has been the better player, I think.
Okay, you're right. I want to back up to what you said. If you're going to take 100 people, I want those 100 people to have watched Chris play every game like I did. Mm-hmm. All right. I don't like people that think they are experts on a topic but didn't really watch the player play closely. We always have this saying, Larry, you've dealt with this for many years. You don't really appreciate a certain player until you get to watch them every day, right? You can change your opinion.
No doubt.
Okay. And so it can
especially in baseball. I think baseball is the sport that's like that.
But it also can work the other way, right? You can think, wow, I can't believe how lucky we are to get this player. And then you watch them every day and you're like, now I understand why that team wanted to move that player, right? It works both ways. Again, I watched Chris play every single game of his NBA career in Sacramento. And during the regular season, he was great, okay? He was great. He would take your breath away. He would do things that you were like, but it did not translate into the playoffs. He never could do that in the postseason. And again, I mean that. Never once in all of the playoff series that he was in Sacramento did I walk away from the gym and say to myself, wow, we saw the real Chris Webber in this playoff series. Wow, Chris was great. Never played that way in the postseason. So if you asked 100 basketball people, I can almost guarantee you they would say Chris Webber over Draymond Green. Not all of them, but I think the majority would. But they're wrong. They're wrong. I'm just telling you, they're wrong.
No, I totally agree with you. But I do agree with you that they would say Webber. Let's finish with one football question. You're running the Niners.
Yeah.
What do they do with Deebo Samuel? It's dominated the headlines. I guess the question is, what do you think they're going to do with Deebo Samuel? What would you do with Deebo Samuel? Is Joe Douglas gonna trade? He's got 4 picks in the top 38. Is he going to trade 3 of them
Yep.
to get Deebo Samuel? Is there that kind of pressure on Douglas to turn things around? New York, the Jets. I know they're not your team, but how do you think the Deebo thing's going to play out? Because everybody has maintained that John Lynch said yesterday at the presser, hey, I'm not trading this player. And I took it the opposite, Grant. Yeah. I took this as John Lynch doesn't like all this conjecture about Deebo Samuel, and he could have put the entire thing to bed by just saying, Deebo Samuel, fellas, is not going to be traded. He's not going to be traded.
But he didn't say that.
So he didn't say that. So I took that as a direct reflection that he is going to be traded. Give me your read on it.
I want to ask you one question first before I give you my answer. Do you feel, because we hear all these different stories and we saw Deebo's comments a couple days ago, do you feel that Deebo Samuel really wants out of San Francisco?
No. I think he wants to be paid like a top wide receiver, and he's thinking about his football mortality. And so I don't think that he wants to be utilized as a running back a lot in the future. And I think he wants less running back carries and he wants more greenbacks.
Second question. How much of Deebo Samuel's success is because of the way Kyle Shanahan used him in the offense? And I'm not saying that Deebo's not
a huge portion, Grant. He had 12 drops last year. He's an ordinary wide receiver. He's a very dominant player with the ball in his hands as a runner.
All right, so if I'm Deebo Samuel, because of what he does in the backfield, he is more susceptible to injury. I understand the money part. But if he goes to another franchise and they utilize him only as a quote-unquote receiver, he's not going to be nearly as effective, right?
Right.
So then what makes you think that team is going to give him the type of money that Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, or whatever? I mean, so to answer your question, if only the Niners know what they're going to end up giving him or what they can give him, and if they feel they can't come up with that number, then Larry, I would trade him. You've been from day one, you've saying you would trade him. You get the picks. Based on our discussion right here, if Deebo Samuel does not want to be utilized both as a wide receiver and a running back, where he's flourished, and because of that, he's in a position to make all of this money, then I would move him, Larry. I would move him and get what I could for him. But on the surface, and I said this to you last week, I don't see how the Niners are better for this next year without Garoppolo and without Samuel. I just don't see it. You'd have to make sure you draft very well. You mentioned you could get a running back with the pick. You could get a wide receiver. You could utilize a couple different people. But what Samuel did for San Francisco last season was so unique and so unbelievable. I think we're fooling ourselves if you're going to be able to just replace that. It's a very complicated issue. I'm not trying to go around and around. Based on what you just said to me, I would trade Deebo Samuel. Based on what you said, the way you put it out there, if you really feel that he doesn't want to be a multi-dimensional player offensively, then I want to trade him. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I love the player. I think he's got tremendous heart. He's a great player to watch. But if you said to me, what's the smarter play? To pay a running back who's had soft tissue injuries and one big year, and you're utilizing him as almost like a short yardage back. He's not just a running back. He's like a short yardage back.
Right.
So if you're going to utilize him that way, I don't want to pay him $70 million guaranteed. I'd rather take the 3 picks and get down the road. And I think John Lynch and the Niners have made this decision. We'll see. We'll see. Thursday night, it's going to be very interesting to see how the draft shakes out. As far as New York City, though, it's year 3 for Joe Douglas. It's year 2 for Robert Saleh. It's off season 3 for Douglas. They're 6-26. They're coming off of a 3-14 campaign. That market. What do you think? Does Joe Douglas need to make a trade like this for a high-profile guy like Deebo to save his gig, or do you think that he's got more time there than I envision?
He needs a sexy guy to go along with Zach Wilson. That's why they
Yeah,
went so hard after Tyreek Hill. I mean, they went out, they got their quarterback from BYU, and he actually towards the end of the year showed that maybe he's the right guy. But the Jets have so many holes. But I mean, it's New York. The Jets have been terrible. The Jets really have lost, and the Giants too. The NFL market in New York has been so bad for the last 10 years. It's been horrible, and there's a lot of I'm not saying the fans don't care about the Jets and the Giants, but it's really at maybe the lowest point it's been in a long time. The Jets need to make that splash, Larry. You know how it is, New York, with the headlines, the tabloids. Totally. They need a splash. Deebo Samuel would be a splash in New York, at least for the short term, and they need to help Zach Wilson. I mean, you draft a quarterback that high. We saw Sam Darnold. Now, Larry, I'm not high on Sam Darnold, but here's the point I'm trying to make, Larry. Do we really know what we need to know about Sam Darnold based on his years with the Jets? Forget about what happened last year in Carolina. The Jets had such a horrible team. They had a bad offensive line. They had no running backs. They had no wide receivers. How are we supposed to evaluate a quarterback? You asked me about Daniel Jones last week. I'm not crazy about Daniel Jones, but Larry, he's played behind arguably the worst offensive line every year of his career. I don't really know if he can play or not. I would say the answer to him being a franchise quarterback, I would say more no than yes. But I don't know because of the people that were around him. Do you know whether I'm not crazy about Sam Darnold, but did we really get a fair evaluation with him based on his years in New York with the Jets? How am I supposed to evaluate Zach Wilson based on last year? How am I supposed to evaluate Trevor Lawrence last year in Jacksonville with the Urban Meyer mess and not having talent around him? You know this a lot better than I do from your background. How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Zach Wilson had a terrible start and then went down the stretch. He took care of the football. Darnold and Jones, I think, have the same problem: mass turnovers. Darnold had that problem both with the Jets, but he had that problem at SC. Jones was coached up by Cutcliffe at Duke, but he's a turnover machine. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, valuing the football, taking care of the football, that's what winning teams do. Losing teams do the opposite. Those two guys they turn the ball over at such a rapid rate that it just any other strengths of their game. I love the way Jones runs. I think Darnold at times can see the field, but their strengths get totally mitigated by the mass turnovers that they bring forward on every single game. I think both those guys need to get to a spot with a good offensive play caller and see if they can reinvent themselves. But I don't have a whole lot of faith. I've got more faith in Jones because I think he's a better athlete than I do in Darnold. But I don't. The thing about it is Brian Billick one time told me, he said, the hardest thing to do in the NFL is to evaluate the quarterback versus what is going on around the quarterback. I think that's really a great point. And I think both Jones and Darnold, they're in that battle. It's like, can we evaluate them? Or is it, as you said, the Giants have the worst offensive line and the Jets have this disaster organization with all kinds of issues. So, it's a difficult thing, but I think Billick has a salient point there. Grant, tell people if they're big fans of you. And after we've had you on the last couple of weeks, lots of people are seeing these podcasts and seeing these YouTube shows and are like, hey, I love Grant. I miss Grant. Where can I, get his stuff? Tell people where they can find you.
The best place is just go to my website. If you don't like that.com, I put all my stuff on there. If you don't like that.com, I also have a show that I do most days at 3:00 Pacific. It's an app called Listen App. It's just like live radio, and I've really been doing well with that. You can tune in, again, 3:00 Pacific live on Listen App. So I got a couple of things. You're going to be coming on my podcast on Friday. I'm looking forward to that. So we'll have some fun. We'll go back and talk about your background. I want to talk to you a little bit about you coming out of Sac State. I want to get back into your early years as well. So we'll have some fun with that on my podcast Friday.
Sounds good. We'll see you then. Thanks,
Grant. Good, Larry. My pleasure.
Take care,
buddy.
man. Always
Thank
awesome.
You.
Fire. Never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you gon' get exactly what you asked for. Here for whatever you bring me, getting handled. I answer to no one, I don't need to hassle. We ain't never fall back. Hold our ground where we at.
Awesome.
Awesome stuff, man. Awesome. Really appreciate it.